All right, this is episode 5, just regular general mob talk with me and Pete.
Yep.
Yeah, so I was watching a lot of shit about the Gambinos. Obviously, Sammy the Bull, I was watching a lot of his shit. I know a lot of it's bullshit.
Yeah, I mean, the Gambinos to me, they're kind of like an overexposed family in the media, whether it's Gotti or like Carlo Gambino. I think even people who like don't really know anything about the mafia have heard like, oh, the Gambino family in some way or the other.
Yeah, they're the most populous one.
Yeah. But because of that, I think that's also kind of why it has a lot of like, because it's kind of such a big name, it's kind of like I think the easiest to maybe not make stuff up about, but like kind of make stuff up about. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so, all right, so in the beginning, when Carlo took over, he was in the news, so the Gambinos, everyone knew about the Gambinos back then. Then after him, everyone knew Castellano.
Yeah, like with Gambino, like you see his name a lot in like the newspapers, like oh, the Godfather of like I've seen newspapers where it's like oh, it's the Godfather of New York. I heard a story. I don't remember who it was from. There was like a meeting with Carlo Gambino and some other guys at a hotel, and someone thought it would be funny to like play the Godfather music in the room, and they were like kind of like I guess they didn't know what it was, and they were like, "Oh, what type of music is this?" Yeah, like he was a pretty big name even back then. I think Gambino has this kind of like um this kind of reputation where he's kind of like low key and quiet, but he wasn't like this unknown guy. Like the media in general, I think kind of knew about him.
When we were doing the rat episode, I wound up finding this after. Somebody said that, yeah, Carlo Gambino, he didn't rat, but he might have it's like, how do you explain it? Because he had so many people in his pocket. Who's to say he wasn't talking to, FBI friends that he had? So is that really ratting if it's his businessmen, like his business people?
Well, like I said, the definition of ratting kind of keeps changing with each generation, you know? Like in Prohibition, it wasn't like uncommon to kind of tell the cops info about like rivals, you know?
Yeah.
Um that's definitely ratting, nowadays, like even the stuff Merlino is doing, like going on podcasts and stuff, even if he's not talking about business, it's still not a good look. And he's not a rat, obviously, because to me, a rat is someone who like gives up people or gives up info. But in terms of like omerta historically, that is, that's not omerta.
Yeah, Merlino said he left the life because there's too many rats.
Yeah, well, I like Merlino. Going to the Gambino Carlo Gambino thing, like I don't know anything specific about that, but like anything's possible. I know I have a buddy who I talk to. He's like super into like the Paul Castellano era, and he was telling me that apparently some Paul Castellano files are like blacked out, and he's like, oh, maybe Castellano in some way was like giving up some level of info.
So yeah, that actually could tie into Carlo Gambino because they had the connections, and that makes sense with
Yeah,
my.
but again, like this is just like speculation,
Yeah, this is all speculation. We're not
you
saying
know.
that, but it's
There's some people out there who say Whitey Bulger isn't a rat because he was only giving up information about the Italians, but he ended up, giving information about his own guys later on. So, and
right.
well, and vice versa. Sorry, but like, it's just such a weird definition that seems to keep changing depending on who the person is.
So I'm not gonna say Castellano ratted or anything like that.
Yeah, no, I mean that's like I said, it's highly unlikely. I'm like my whole point here is just that like, push comes to shove, anything is possible.
Yeah, because even before, all right, we know Lucky was a businessman. Carlo was a businessman. Paul was a businessman. So
Yeah, and like with Bonanno too, I think I said in the rat episode, some people are like, oh, Joe Bonanno's a rat because, he wrote that book at one point. That was like kind of giving up information about like Cosa Nostra like traditions.
yeah,
And because of that, Joe Massino at one point in the 90s was like, I want to rename the Bonanno family to the Massino family because I don't want to rat. Funnily enough, he's like, I don't want a rat name on the family. And then look what fucking happened with him.
unbelievable.
Yeah. More often than not, like on the street, people will refer to them as like whoever their boss is. Like I know during the 70s, like guys on the street would sometimes refer to the Colombos as Persico's family. Um, Luke's or Lucchese's or the Lukes, that's kind of a slang term for them. The Genovese historically have been called the West Side recently. I've heard like again, like this is just kind of like Reddit information of like the bananas being called bananas.
Not be
Yeah,
responsible
So
for
like
a murder
it's just kind of like a
committed at somebody
street like
else's
level
hands.
kind of like
Sources
criminal
say
term
Gravano could help
that they
solve
all kind of
mob hits
refer to each
like
other
the
by,
World Trade Center
or they'll say
murder
like, oh,
of
the
Gambino member
Lucchese
Louis DeBono.
Borgata. Is
DeBono was killed for
Borgata
not
is technically
reportedly
like family
responding
or
to a
group.
Gotti
That's kind of
order,
like the
or the
Italian word
runout of
for
Edward
for it,
Leno, a former
yeah.
Gotti
So
associate who was cleared in a drug trial
I'm
that
sure you
convicted
do have
Gotti's
guys
brother
saying like, oh, I'm
Gene.
with the
Another
Colombos
New
because
York
it's kind
crime
of just like a
family, the
brand
Colombos,
name.
is reportedly also
But
being rocked by a
there's
major
so many
defection.
different slang
The Sunday
words, and
night
that's kind
killing
of
of
what I was
reputed
getting
mob
into
loan
with
shark Henry
Massino
Sumra in
wanting to
Sheepshead Bay,
change the name.
Brooklyn, could stem from the reported turning
Good
of
thing
alleged
they
Colombo
didn't do
capo
that.
Gregory Scarpa, who is said to
Well, it
be
would have been
informing
ironic,
on a dozen more murders.
with what
Besides
happened.
Gotti, the whole mob
Yep.
may not have much to be thankful for.
So you had Paul Castellano, back to the Gambinos. Now John wasn't really a businessman. Gravano was the businessman.
Yeah, like Castellano was a businessman, obviously, like you said. And he was also kind of like well liked by that kind of like Sicilian kind of like Gambino group, Cherry Hill stuff, all that. Like he was kind of on that side of things. Whereas Gotti was more of like with the American street guy faction, so to speak. Obviously with Ruggiero and them. So yeah, like obviously Gravano was good at making money, but I think Gotti had that kind of like gangsterism about him. And when he became boss, I'm sure there were some people who were like, you know what? I don't care who's the boss, let him take the fucking lightning, you know?
Yeah,
But you see that a lot, and like even Tony Soprano, like like there's in the Sopranos, there's that whole thing of like, oh, we're gonna let Uncle Junior be the lightning rod. At the end of the day, like, isn't Tony Soprano too also just a lightning rod later on? Like there's people in, historically in LCN who they don't really care who the boss is. They just want to make the money.
do you think that was the case with the Chin, or they truly like this is the guy?
Well, no, like obviously they know who the boss is, and they might prefer like, oh, I want this guy's the boss. I'm not saying they don't like, obviously like in terms of a hierarchy it matters, but I'm saying like, the street guys, like it's kind of just like, okay, if this guy's the boss and he's the boss, they don't really have like a strong opinion one way or another about it.
Yeah,
Because I know what the Genovese was like, they had a lot of like weird the media term is front boss, but it's more so just like an acting boss position. And they had like kind of a board of like capos at times running the family, at other times historically. So obviously the Chin was the boss, but kind of float up and down a bit.
sometimes they care. Like when Carmine Galante tried to get in there and say, "Yeah, I'm the boss," and no captains ruled them in.
Yeah, and the guys like that, like those are guys who are power hungry, like same as like Vito Genovese and Frank Costello. That was like an ego thing that well, I guess maybe more so Genovese had, where he just some guys, and that's kind of where Gotti like comes in, where he's like, I want to be the fucking boss.
Yeah,
But if you're smart, you don't really, it's just kind of like, dude, there's soldiers who make more money than capos sometimes, and like it's just about like surviving at the end of the day.
Well, wasn't Paul gonna try to kill Gotti, and that's why he started to make the moves?
Well, so it's claimed. Yeah, they were kind of paranoid because of those wiretaps that with Ruggiero. Um, so and in general, I've heard there was friction in the family anyway. So it's just kind of like a lot of things kind of rolled into one. But I also think like Gotti, like there was just people egging him on at the same time. Where it's like, yeah, 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 like you're a street guy, we want you, type of thing. And they was like, they might have been willing to use him. Like, can you imagine if Gotti failed and like Castellano fucking survived somehow?
That would have been a big
It
war.
would have been like, yeah, it would have been like the '90s Colombo War. You'd have like, like maybe the street guy slash Gotti faction versus like kind of the more like Sicilian faction of the family.
Yeah, Castellano had a lot of zips.
Yeah, like I said before, like Gambino and like Castellano was related to him, I think, but like that side of the family was technically that side of the family is who's in power now, at least according to the FBI. Obviously, um, I guess you've seen that Nadu video where he's like saying that like Gene Gotti is the boss and stuff, but I don't really believe that. I still think it's with the historic Sicilian faction running things now.
Yeah, I don't think Gene's boss. No way.
Because the guy's like Gene Gotti's like he's on like 21 years parole or something like I don't know the exact amount, but it's like something crazy like that. Gene is like the quote unquote like faction boss of like the American guys, like over the Carrazos and Louis Valario and all these kind of like American guys. And maybe he's like respected in that regard, but he's not like the official boss.
Yeah,
If I was him, I just lay back, get some money, and then just chill out. Because otherwise, for all I know, maybe it is an ego thing, and he's like, oh, I want to be boss.
yeah, but you have the John's son trying to be like a advocate, trying to put bad guys away, and then Gene comes in and he's boss. That makes no sense.
If Castellano had survived, well, he was fucked anyway. Like he was under indictment. He was probably gonna go to jail for the rest of his life, like the other commission case guys. So they would have put someone in there.
What do you think would have been put in?
Well, it could have been an old timer guy. Maybe if they wanted to stick to that side of the family, they could have put Tommy Gambino in, Carlos' son. He wasn't really a street guy as far as I know, but that's kind of like who I would maybe think they would put in, but I'm sure they had a long like rung of like older guys who kind of wanted to be like pushed up or like ex cap or sorry, capos or whatever. Even like Dellacroce, like if he had survived, like if he didn't die of cancer, I don't know how good he would be either because he's also kind of like a street guy, and I don't know, just that whole thing is like it just changes the family dynamic a little bit.
One thing about Dellacroce, everyone, even the cops, they just feared that guy. His stare and his look, they all said he was like a true gangster.
Yeah, and he was around for a long time in that family, and he looked weird. Like you're right, like he was blonde, he was like very pale. He looked almost like he was like a German or something.
Yeah,
Same as like with the Columbos too. Maybe Vic Arena would have been a better fit than Persico because Persico was in prison, and maybe his son wasn't as good an option there. But at the end of the day, a lot of captains sided and said we're going to stick with Persico.
I wonder if that was the better choice.
Well, in the long run, it was the safer choice because Persico remained boss, and but I'm saying like it's kind of that same thing. There's like the street guy side of the family who seems to like lean towards Arena, kind of the up and coming guys, and then you kind of have the long time dudes kind of sticking with Persico.
Yeah, Persico wasn't that bad.
No, but like my thing again is like he just was like very he had a lot of nepotism around him, like putting his sons and relatives in positions of power. Supposedly his nephew, Skinny Teddy Persico, is the boss right now of the Columbos. It was Robert D'Onofrio for a little bit as an acting boss, but then once Teddy got out, he presumably took the reign.
Yeah.
I don't know, like maybe if I was, God forbid, in that situation, maybe I would have sided with Arena. Maybe I would have been like, okay, well, Persico was in prison, like why can't this guy? Because Arena was already the acting boss. He just got kind of too big for his boots. It's kind of weird, because like obviously Greg Scarpa was on the Persico faction, but then you have guys like Wild Bill Catolo, who's kind of like the Scarpa equivalent on the Arena side. He was also like a big, like he wasn't a rat obviously, but he was like a big time like gangster.
Yeah. Who took over when Chin got arrested?
For the Genovese, as far as I know, there was kind of like a weird ruling panel for a little bit, and then later on, Bellomo kind of became like the boss. But there was guys thrown in between here and there, though.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was a confusing. It was an intriguing family, like mysterious.
Yeah, they're pretty good at like keeping people guessing. Like even now, like Barney Bellomo's supposedly the boss, but then you have like some people saying it's Ernie Muscarella, who was another like big time Genovese guy. And it's just it's kind of a mess. But I as far as I know, and as far as like what the FBI is claiming and stuff, it's Bellomo.
Yeah.
But Bellomo was a big reason why Joey Merlino was recognized as the Philly boss after the Stanfa situation. For a little bit because of how it went. Like the Lucchese's didn't recognize Merlino, and some of the New York guys were kind of like, is this family even legitimate at this point because of what was going on? And Bellomo supposedly kind of helped them say like, okay, Merlino is officially the boss for Philly.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and then that's supposedly where it leads into this shelving thing, where apparently Bellomo was involved in that too, where he's like, excuse me, he's like you can't be doing the podcasting, and they were just kind of pissing him, and they shelved him.
Yeah, I gotta stop fucking listening to Sammy.
Yeah, again, like Gravano too. Like Gravano has this like crazy claim where it's like, oh, we didn't even know who the Los Angeles family was, which is just a fucking crazy thing to say because New York used to have like meetings with the LA brass back in the day, and how can he say that like they don't know who the LA family is? Now, don't get me wrong. There's definitely some members who are like, oh yeah, that family's a joke. Or, they might have disparaging remarks. Like I know like in Giovanni Rocco, that FBI agent's book about the Decavalcantes, there's a part where like some Decavalcante member is having a meeting with a Gambino member, and the Gambino member is like, I don't give a fuck if you're made, pretty much. Like kind of like insinuating that like, Jersey's a bit of a joke, but as far as I know, that was kind of reprimanded a little bit. I could be wrong, but that's my point. Like, like it's just kind of you can't really. There's members who have like kind of private opinions, but at the end of the day, like a family's like a family, and they still do business with them. Especially LA. Like LA was, even though if they were weaker than New York, they were still like a well-known family back in the day.
Yeah.
But I do know what you're referring to. No, but yeah, no, like I don't know, like you hear that a lot of like some of these YouTubers throwing around words like, oh, crew or crew or crew. A crew to me is just like the crew under a captain. Like it's not like, I don't know why they refer to families as like crews because it's a little bit like of a confusing thing. But no, dude, Buffalo has always been really big. They had a lot of links to the Bananas back in the day. They have a lot of stuff with Canada going on. Buffalo is a very respected family, especially, nowadays.
I got that from because I was listening to Sammy. He was talking about some shit. He had to go to Buffalo.
Yeah,
And
I've seen a video of him saying he met with I think it was Tadaro Jr. or Tadaro Sr. And he was
yeah,
saying that like they made him have a meeting in the pool or ocean or something.
he said he was walking in the ocean and he wound up being up to his neck, which it sounds bullshit.
Well, I knowing kind of how Buffalo is kind of very like, paranoid about wires, I wouldn't be surprised, but if anything, that's smart.
No, that is smart, but he was calling them like not a real family, a crew.
Yeah, I'm not gonna. That's just. He might have that opinion as the Gambino underboss at one point, but that is just historically untrue. Jersey was obviously they got kicked around a little bit. Like there's that story of like John Gotti forcing them to remake people in the 80s because apparently they weren't like making people properly. Which is a little bit funny considering the Bonannos kind of did the same thing. Like, there's so many like testimonies of like Bonanno members who saying like, "Oh, I was inducted just by someone telling me that I was made," pretty much. Without the knife or without the gun, whatever. So the Bonannos got away with it, but clearly the Decavalcantes didn't in that story. Like even this that John Panisi, that excellent the Lucchese YouTuber guy, I keep harping on about, like, he says he was made with like a diabetic needle, so um but I think that's just kind of a family thing. Like there's also like a Philadelphia there's like a wiretap from like the 2010s of I think it's Steve Mazzone, who at the time was the underboss. They recorded a making ceremony where just like, "Oh, everyone come," and they join hands and they're like, "Oh yeah, you're with the Philadelphia Borgata." Like, there's no knife, there's no nothing. So I think some families kind of lean into that more than others. I think some there's kind of like pseudo ceremonies, and then for some there's no ceremonies. Like I think the most egregious example is I think it was I think Fradiano was there, Bombensero, and then a few other LA guys. There's a story of like they're in the back of a fucking car, and they're making a guy in the back of a car. And so yeah, like you have some that are like super ritualistic, and then some that are just like, "Oh, let's just fucking get this over and done with." You know what I mean? But funnily enough, about the whole sword thing, like I've never heard of a sword being on the table. Usually it's a knife or a pin, and then the gun, and then the saint. Yeah, so like I said, there's that story of Gotti pretty much going to the Decavalcantes and saying like, the Decavalcantes obviously are the real DeMeo/Soprano family, but he's like, you have to fucking remake guys because you're not fucking doing it. So obviously Gotti was like a little bit of a traditionalist in that way, that like he wanted people to get made properly.
Yeah, he was old school.
Maybe you've seen it already. There was a Bonanno ceremony in Hamilton in Canada around the same time, like 2015ish. And they're just in a hotel room with like an unmade bed, telling a guy, "Oh, you're in the Bonanno board like family now." So it's kind of, I guess, you know, just let's just get it over and done with type of attitude.
That's fucked up.
And I'd be a little pissed, man, like, because some of these guys, they grow up and they're hearing all these fucking great stories of like, "Oh, this is what it's like." And then, it's just kind of, you have this thing where it's like, let's get this fucking shit over and done with. I'd be a little pissed. I'd be like, really? Like, I get the fucking shitty end of the stick. I thought this was supposed to be like a big thing. Like in the future, who knows, man? Maybe they'll take you to McDonald's and over a coffee, fucking tell you. I'd be so pissed. Like, what's the point of being in the fucking mob at that fucking point? Like, and I think that's kind of adding to this like supposed, the decline is overstated, but the decline ish of the mob is these type of things where there's like, what's the point of being in a thing if it's losing all of its tradition and it's just kind of becoming like a normal like gang?
That's basically, yeah, you're right.
Like, and even like just like the type of like guys they're getting, like, like you look at guys back in the day and it's like, oh, this is a mafioso. And now you see these guys walking around in like tracksuits and they're fucking like balding, and it's like they're dressed like slobs, they're acting like slobs. It's like this is what their fucking made guys are like now.
They can't even hold down a shop anymore without getting robbed. All right, that was episode 5, Basic Mob Talks with Ceerious and Pete. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll catch you in the next video.
See